Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, here we are, the 5th anniversary of, well, at least this weekend, what many affectionately or disaffectionately call Obamacare. It's kind of hard to call it the Affordable Care Act because many of us know exactly how much jeopardy it's put finances for people all over the country. There are some people that are getting back enough in subsidies that they like it, but it's important, I think, as it was a great follow-up to my friend from Georgia talking about the budget, to follow up and look at the predictions that were made 5 years ago about the bill that passed without a single Republican vote because we had done our homework. I did read the bill before I voted against it. I didn't have time to enmesh all of the references, the other bills that were referenced and the changes that would be made in those bills, but I could certainly tell from what was there, what I was reading in the about 2,500-page bill, that it was going to be a disaster for health care. But in any event, here's an article from Sam Baker, 5 years in, 5 busted predictions about Obamacare. March 22nd, 2015, when President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act into law 5 years ago, many Republicans essentially predicted it would grow up to be a serial killer, that seniors, Medicare, private insurance companies, jobs, and American dream would die by its hands. It's turned out to be far more well-adjusted. On the other hand, many Democrats thought the law would quickly make it through its awkward phase and turn into the most popular kid in school, liked by most, respected by all, a sophisticated winner, possessed of all the latest technology, but also with unassailable principles. It's turned out to be a much bigger screw-up. And I might add, parenthetically here, into the article that actually there were Republicans like me that knew that it was not going to die. We knew that it was going to shrivel up the number of insurance companies, as it has. We knew that Medicare was going to take a hit because Obamacare cut $716 billion from seniors' health care. And even though the president and all the king's horses and all the king's men were promising that, gee, that's $716 billion in cuts to Medicare, it's not going to affect you seniors, they were told. No, that's only going to affect the health care providers. I don't know about the rest of the country, but the seniors I talked to around Texas figured out, wait a minute, if you're not going to reimburse the people that provide us health care, we're going to have a harder time getting health care. They figured it out. It's exactly what's happened. So Mr. Baker talking about, I guess, the worst of the projection by Republicans were not what I projected, but there are people that have not gotten the care they need. They have been put in dire physical straits because of Obamacare. Some have lost their insurance. I had insurance before. I liked my insurance. I like my doctors. Obamacare changed all of that. This article, though, says, say what you will about Obamacare. If nothing else, it's a survivor. And that's the point, Madam Speaker, that's important to note. Any kind of medicine is always a survivor. Some were saying, oh, we don't have to worry about Obamacare. It will go broke. It will die of its own accord. No, that's what happens to socialism. But socialized health care, socialized medicine in any form, even in this beginning stage, as the president once said on video, that he wanted a single payer, and in other words, total socialized medicine, where the government gets to tell everybody what they get and pay for it, and so people get rationed health care is what it amounts to. Socialism dies of its own accord, as Margaret Thatcher once said, eventually runs out of other people's money. Socialized medicine in any form does not die of its own volition. It doesn't happen. Because what happens when you're dealing with government-run health care, it doesn't die of its own accord. No, what happens is people have more and more health care rationed. More and more people have health care they don't get because they're put in line. Like the young man from Canada in my district that said his father died of a heart attack because he had been on the list in Canada for 2 years and he never got the bypass he needed. And until Obamacare came along, it basically, if you needed bypass surgery, whether it was in East Texas or elsewhere, if you needed it now, you were going to get it now. But over time, as the government takes over health care, now you get on a list. Like my constituent's father was put on a list. I said, 2 years, that's incredible. He said, well, yeah, people kept getting moved in front of him. I said, well, my understanding was that it was a crime to do anything to get yourself moved up the list. And he said, well, that's true, but there is a board, a group that decides who gets moved up the list in priority. And they kept moving people in front of his father until he died. But anyway, some critics, this article says, didn't even think they'd need to kill it, just that they could help it along. The law's opponents argued for years that the law would never work, predictions that reached new intensity when healthcare.gov launched in 2013. But that's not true of all of us. Some of us knew it would not die of its own accord. We knew it's like any government-run health care. You just ration it, people get less of it, and there is a board. Whether anybody wants to acknowledge that Sarah Palin had a great point, she did. Whether you want to call it a death panel or not, it's a panel that will get to decide the parameters for people getting, pacemakers. One of my staff had a parent was told 1 year, the year before Obamacare kicks in, he could get a pacemaker. After it kicked in, he couldn't get a pacemaker. Well, that's the power of the government to tell you who lives, who dies. But Obamacare is not going to die of its own accord. People may die of their own because of the new health care laws and the decisions of the death panel or whatever you want to call the IPAB, but they will make decisions that will affect people's ability to live. Anyway, down says, talks about the prediction it would get popular. Quote, I think as people learn about the bill and now that the bill is enacted, it's going to become more and more popular, unquote, Senator Chuck Schumer said in 2010, just a few days after Obama signed the law. Quote, I predict by November those who voted for health care will find it an asset. Those who voted against it will find it a liability, unquote. Schumer was hardly the only one expressing the optimism. The process of getting Obamacare passed was brutal for Democrats. But many of the party truly thought the heat would die down between 2010 and 2014 when the law's central provisions kicked in. The debate got to a point where there was no way to win the rhetorical wars over health care. So Democrats' plan was largely to get it done, wait it out, and hope people warmed up to the law once it transitioned from a political abstraction to a set of real-world policies, most of which get pretty boring. It didn't work. The Kaiser Family Foundation has been measuring public approval of the health care law every month since it was signed. And the bottom line has stayed the same. People are closely divided over the law and lean against it. This month, Kaiser's poll found 43% disapproval for the law compared to 41% approval, which is within a few points of most months. There have been few blips where approval topped disapproval or where one side cleared 50%, but they never lasted. Anyway, the article goes on. I skipped down to the part, if you like your plan, you can keep it. It says Obama made some predictions he probably shouldn't have, including his promise that people wouldn't lose their coverage because of Obamacare. For starters, policies sold in the individual insurance market were largely one-year contracts before the Affordable Care Act. In other words, there was never a guarantee that consumers could keep their same policies. Moreover, though, Obamacare did cause insurers to cancel millions of individual policies, and it wasn't an accident or a side effect. The law set new standards for policies in the individual market. They have to cover a set of essential benefits, for example, and can't impose an annual or lifetime cap on benefits. A lot of plans that existed before Obamacare didn't meet those criteria, hence passing a law to make them. Those policies could technically seek grandfathered status, but it was hard to get. They could barely make any changes in their plan designs without losing that status. And it was hard for a reason. The law set new standards for insurance, and it wanted to shift people into plans that met those standards. All of this was entirely foreseeable in 2010 and was even spelled out in subsequent regulations. Political uproar might not have been as bad if healthcare.gov had been working when people started to receive their cancellation notices. Well, I would submit that it would have been as bad because there were a lot of lies about Obamacare. And yes, there were some dire predictions, but I knew that Obamacare was not going to die of its own mission, because when government controls health care, it doesn't. And as an exchange student in the Soviet Union, when I saw their poor, pitiful health care system in the Soviet Union, I was literally thanking God that we had the health system we did in America. And my family didn't even have anything like insurance at the time growing up in East Texas. It was just that we knew that we had good doctors, we had good system, and, you know, if you got in a bind, that you hoped and prayed neighbors would help out. But then that's where insurance came along, that you could pay a very small monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually premium to insure against something unforeseeable so that you could take care of the small things. But once the government gets into something, it doesn't work so well. And the more government gets into it, the worse it is. And if we don't turn this thing around and get some free market competition back in place in healthcare, allow people to have their own relationship with their own doctor of their own choosing, where people can actually compare the prices and decide if this doctor or this hospital is worth it. One may cost more, one costs less, but you compare the pros and cons. That's what competition is about, and we haven't had it in healthcare in many, many years. Why? Because the government got involved. Now, we do need a safety net, and that's a good thing. It's what carriers do. But when the government takes over everything, as Obamacare will undoubtedly eventually do. Why? Because if they get to dictate health care, then they're going to get to dictate your life. An article from John Nolte today points out, number one, premiums are 24.4% higher than they would have been without Obamacare. And I guess this comes from the New York Daily News, quote, in the Obama administration, candidate Obama boasted in 2008, quote, we'll lower premiums by up to $2,500 for a typical family in a year. This article says not quite. A recent report from the National Bureau of Economic Research examined the non-group marketplace where families and individuals who don't get coverage through workshop for insurance. The report concluded that 2014 premiums are 24.4% higher than they would have been without Obamacare. Completely wrong. Obamacare sent the price of insurance dramatically up. Madam Speaker, I'm sure you, like I have people ask regularly, why is my health insurance so much more? My deductible is so high. I'll never have enough money to pay my deductible. And I've got a copay on top of that. And I don't have as much covered that I did before in my other policy. And I don't get to choose my doctor. The doctor I had before that I liked, I didn't get to keep him. So why is it costing so much more? The answer is very easily given. You're paying for lots more IRS agents. We knew when Obamacare passed there'd be 17,000, 18,000 new IRS agents you'd have to pay for. They're not going to ever help you with a head injury or a skin knee. Nothing. No, they're going to come after you. They're going to give you stomach aches and headaches. They're not going to help you with health care. And what about all these navigators? They're never going to help you with a knee injury or a backache. No, they're going to give you backaches because they're going to make it harder and harder to figure out what to do, even though they say, oh, they're there to help you. Yeah, when the government workers tell you they're there to help you, you grab your wallet, run for the door. But you're paying for so many more government workers who will end up being government union workers. And you got to help pay the union wages. We always apparently do that, paying for part of the costs of the union. That's because Republicans are real good at allowing Democrats to have laws that help fund their campaigns. Done it for years. Mallory Factor had a good book out on shadow bosses that explains the concept. Well, here's another point from John Nolte's article, number 2, less choice for patients from 1,232 private market insurers to 310. Rather dramatic, but that was very foreseeable. Many of us talked about it. We knew that this would eliminate many of the insurance companies. It would eliminate so much choice. Dodd-Frank promises, gee, we're going to fix the banking industry. No, you're going to make it hard for small banks to compete, and the big banks chew them up, absorb them when they can't make it, and then you have fewer choices. That's what Obamacare is doing. As the article says, prior to Obamacare, the individual insurance market, non-group, non-employer, offered a wealth of choices and health care options. Obamacare has devastated that market, and with it, the quality of health care. Keep in mind the cost of premiums and deductibles have increased as choice and competition collapsed. Patients may also have fewer doctors to pick from. More than 60% of doctors plan to retire earlier than anticipated by 2016 or sooner, according to Deloitte. The Physicians Foundation reported in the fall that nearly half of the 20,000 doctors who responded to their survey, especially those with more experience, considered Obamacare's reforms a failure. Number 3, deficit exploded to $1.2 trillion with a T. Forget the original lies that Obamacare would be a deficit neutral or even cut the deficit. The Obamacare deficit is now in the trillions. This month, the CBO estimated the law's 10-year costs will reach $1.2 trillion, a far cry from the president's initial promise of $940 billion. Well, and I have to point out, actually, in fairness to CBO, Congressional Budget Office originally predicted it would be over $1 trillion, but since the president promised it'd be less than $1 trillion, the director of CBO was called to the White House, and magically, after he went back and reformulated things, and I'm offends him, but it's still the truth. It's what happened. He went back, recalculated, and it was less than $1 trillion. And the president says, see there, I told you it'd be less than $1 trillion. Then it passes, then we found out, oh, you know what? It really is more than $1 trillion. How about that? That's why I think CBO needs competition, and the best thing that could happen is if we started encouraging and even gave rewards to any entity, whether it's universities, private groups that begin scoring bills. They get within a certain margin. If a bill passes, they get within a certain margin. It would sure beat the heck out of CBO. And then you pay them. We need competition scoring bills so that we don't have the disasters we had in the predictions of the cost of Obamacare. Number 4, media and government lying about Obamacare expanding coverage to millions. You keep hearing about how Obamacare is covering millions when it really isn't. A huge majority of those the White House and its media throne sniffers are advertising as, quote, newly insured, unquote, are in fact victims of canceled policies who were forced into the Obamacare exchanges. They already had insurance and are therefore not newly insured. Even some of those newly insured under Obamacare's expansion of Medicaid were once paying for their own insurance. Now they're on the government dole. Further, as many as 89% of the Americans who signed up for Obamacare when the exchanges opened in 2013 already had insurance. In other words, many exchange enrollees simply switched from one plan to another. So we were told, gee, there's this 30, 40 million people without insurance. We've got to insure them. That's why we've got to force so many tens of millions of Americans into losing their insurance because we got 30, 40 million we got to take care of. And what happened? We're told, well, maybe 7 million or so, 8 million, they got insurance when all these millions lost theirs. That was worth the damage that this administration has done and is doing to the best health care system in the world. Number 5, Obamacare's deductibles are killing families. One of the great untold stories about Obamacare is that while Obamacare has skyrocketed premium costs in the individual market, deductibles have also increased. Obamacare is really nothing more than a catastrophic insurance priced like regular insurance. This year, Obamacare's lower-priced bronze plans have $5,181 in individual deductible and $10,545 in family deductible. The more expensive silver plan has $2,927 individual deductible and $6,000 in family deductible. On top of your monthly premiums, the deductible is the amount you have to pay out of pocket before your insurance kicks in. The last time I looked, I enrolled in Obamacare, my out-of-pocket expenses, premiums plus deductible, would exceed $8,000 before insurance started paying anything. One result of this has been an increase over the last 5 years of the percentage of people off treatment due to cost. Unless something catastrophic happens to you, in most cases, you are still paying out of pocket for all of your health care. On top of that, you're paying for premiums that are doing you absolutely no good. It's just free money for the insurance companies. Also, when you're insured, your out-of-pocket expenses are usually higher. Most healthcare outlets offer steep discounts for the uninsured. Basically, Obamacare is nothing more than a massive tax increase disguised as insurance. A massive financial boon to the same big insurance companies Democrats have demonized for years. A massive redistribution of wealth that primarily soaks the middle class while diminishing their quality of health care. In summation, the health care victims vastly outweigh the beneficiaries. It is not even close. John Nolte, for the record. And then from the Weekly Standard, feds say the cost of healthcare.gov estimated at $1.7 billion. And of course, when the disastrous rollout of this government website happened, we heard from people who really knew what they were doing that said, gosh, we could have done this for just $6 million or so. Well, not if you're close friends with the occupants of the White House. If you're close friends with the occupants of the White House, you're going to run up $1 billion bill for a $6-7 million website that doesn't have the security that's required. So we're in big trouble here. Health care has not been helped, and we have more and more government workers who are people who know how to provide health care, what they can or can't do, all to the detriment of the patient. Think about one of my constituents. He's no longer practicing medicine. He was there to help my wife when she first went into labor 8 to 10 weeks prematurely. And he was telling me that he had done a surgery, one of the best he'd ever done. Just because of all his training and his many years of experience, he was good at what he was doing. And a couple of days after the surgery, he got a call from somebody, I think he said in Pennsylvania. Guy had no kind of medical degree at all. He's a government worker. He said, I was looking at your records of your surgery. It was one of the best he'd ever done of this type. He said, well, the average is over 3 hours, and you only took 59 minutes. And normally you lose over 3 to 4 pints of blood, and you only lost 10 cc's. So you're going to either have to change the records or we can't reimburse you. As this honest, experienced, excellent physician said, I'm not changing my records for you or anybody. Well, then we can only reimburse you about a quarter of what you should have gotten otherwise. He said, I'm not practicing medicine like this. Some idiot doesn't even know what he's doing is going to tell me in one of the best surgeries I've ever done that I can't be reimbursed. And he's retired. He gave it up. He said, I plan to practice a lot longer, but I'm not practicing medicine like this. So who's hurt? His patients. So what happens when you socialize medicine as we're moving into? Well, you have fewer doctors that are as well trained. The best and brightest don't apply. We've already seen a drop in the quality of people and the numbers of people, so I'm told, for medical school. Good people still applying. But eventually, as I saw in the Soviet Union when I was there, you have people who are physicians. Some, like Florence Nightingale, they do it out of a sense of service, dedication, but some just because, hey, it's a job. But as people are finding out, if you're not going to get reimbursed, then you're not going to be able to pay back $250,000 of loans for college, medical school, getting you through the internship, residency, till you're actually out making good money, because you're not going to make it as good. And therefore, you can't afford to go through as many years. So you end up, over years, you see the college, the medical school, all these years of training experience squished together. What's the result? Well, you don't have as good of physicians, but you also have wonderful nurse practitioners. You have physician's assistants that start taking up the jobs that people went through college and medical school, internship, residency. They start picking up the slack that you used to have quality, well-trained doctors to do. And they're doing a good job, but it lowers further and further the quality of care anytime the government gets involved to the extent that it is now. It's not too late. It's 5 years in. It has been a disaster, one broken promise after another, after another, after another. And I hope and pray that people don't have to continue to suffer the indignity of much too high health insurance and not near the quality they were getting until we get a new president and can finally get a new health care system and have true reform. I hope and pray that this president does not end up being so stubborn that he will not hear the cries of the people across America who are saying, please, let us have back our cheaper health care, our own doctors, our better policies. That should be the conclusion after 5 years of this disaster. And with that, Madam Speaker,